moving away from that, there are a few other questions that you know, I would like the panel to discuss. And the first one is to you, Georgia. Actually, is what innovative approaches have you seen to promote work-life balance without compromising productivity?
Sorry, my mute and my unmute is very slow. I will touch on that, and I think actually it kind of moves on from what Sue and Sachin, you were both discussing around. I think there's this, it's not even an argument, but there needs to be this blend of individual accountability from your own personal perspective, but also having that psychological safety within the structure of an organization or a team environment where you feel supported if you put your hand up and say that you're struggling. And I think, you know, we can think about this in the context of work-life balance, and it's actually a term I really struggle with. And I think to echo a lot of what Charlotte has suggested, it's not really about work-life balance, and I don't even think it's really about work-life integration, because what we actually have is life, and work forms a part of that. And just as Charlotte said, that can be a bigger part or a smaller part. And, you know, our experience of that looks completely different. Our responsibilities outside of quote unquote work look different. And, you know, we all have different roles to play. And I think the pandemic, as we know, has like really thrown our ways of working up in there a little bit. And organizations, companies are still trying to figure out how things are landing and what that looks like. And if we think about that in the context of hybrid working or, you know, fully remote working that some organizations are choosing. And if you look at the team environment, there might be maybe 2 or 3 different individuals within that team that are performing perhaps similar roles in which they have the same tasks to complete, the same responsibilities, similar projects to manage, etc., etc. But the way that they like to perform those tasks, when they like to perform those tasks, how they go about doing it, again, looks completely different. And I think what we really need to get to is, you know, this element of conversation and communication in the team environment, and really recognizing what good looks like for each individual, but how they can be supported within a structure that that really allows for that. Because I think when we think about productivity on an individual perspective, what we're really looking at and we're really hoping for is that each individual can reach their full potential within an organization. And, you know, we can think about it in the context of creating an inclusive work environment, but everyone's situation is completely different. And I think it is really about that constant feedback loop. And just as Sue said, that communication, having that open communication, that open dialogue within a team that really allows people to put their hand up when they're struggling, put their hand up for to ask for help, but also knowing that they'll be in an environment where things will change, or there can be a conversation, and there can be that element of like reflection, not just from the individual perspective, but also from the environment of the team, and how we can perhaps, you know, shift workloads or shift responsibilities, and that being a constant dialogue. You know, I don't think anyone wants anyone to get to the point where they're so overwhelmed and bombarded with responsibilities at work that they have to leave. I think, you know, from my past experience in a corporate and in an HR team, it's the last thing you want is for someone to come to you and at the point of, you know, resignation, where they're like, I can't deal with this anymore, but they haven't had that psychological safety, or they haven't felt comfortable enough to come to a line manager, a colleague, or, you know, whether it is someone in HR or a mental health first aid or whatever, whoever it might be, to actually just open up and tell, like, to, you know, let someone know how they're feeling, and just look for ways to kind of deal with that as a collective, or, you know, take a more collaborative view to that. And I think that's, you know, just to kind of tie it back to this idea of like balance, it is just constantly asking, okay, like what's working for who and how and when, and how can we support each individual, but also in the context of the team.
Yeah, that's perfect.
But hopefully something.
No. That's brilliant. What I'm hearing from you, and I really appreciate again the information you've shared there, is open communication and just being able to talk, and understanding that, you know, again, we've highlighted this a few times already, is that each individual situation is different. How can you ensure that that individual gets the best out of themselves and what does work-life balance look like for them. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, and I think that's very important. So I guess moving on from that, so for you, Charlotte, I wanted to ask a question. I mean, can you share a recent example of a work-related situation that's positively or negatively influenced your mental and emotional well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's bizarre how much this actually completely relates to what you just said, Georgia, and the themes that are already coming out of this event. Like I didn't plan for that to be true, so I'll try and not repeat everything that's been said. But the example that I'll give is, I guess, both negative and positive in terms of where I'm at now. So I began experiencing what became chronic pain during the pandemic. It was in both my hands, my arms, my wrists, my elbows, and spreading. Basically started with tendonitis and then just grew. So it became really hard to predict the pain. I would wake up each morning and not quite know what I was going to get. It obviously naturally had a huge impact on my work. There's a lot of things that I couldn't really do, but also in my life in general, really simple everyday things, washing my hair, like cooking, just absolutely really struggled and lived in this state of chronic pain for quite some time. And I tried to remain positive, this feeling of, we'll power through and we'll get through it, and there's positivity at the end. But it really became quite difficult to remain positive, because I would have a sense of optimism each time I tried something new, like a new kind of technique to feel well again, and it wouldn't work. And each time I lost a little bit of hope. And that really took a toll on me. Now, I'm not in that position at all now, so I have the privilege of looking back on this now with a sense of gratitude and appreciation that it didn't end up in a worse position. But what I really valued at the time was my amazing manager having exactly that type of conversation with me, which was an open, regular dialogue. And she said to me, "What is going to be helpful for you right now?" And each time she asked that question, there could have been a different answer, but that didn't matter. The point was that she was recognizing that would be different each day. Sometimes I didn't even know what I needed. I couldn't get control of this. I couldn't predict this behavior, but I knew that I needed to work together with someone who understood, someone who ever said, I just can't work today. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to work tomorrow. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to work next week. And luckily, because I was in an open and safe environment and with people who supported me and who I could trust, we navigated through that. And that really enabled my recovery. And some things we did were to completely remove responsibilities from our role that I just couldn't do. Other adjustments we made actually ended up being really healthy in the long term. So, for example, utilising speak-to-text software, which was a much faster way of typing, and I still use that now. But I think what I recognized is that there is the need to be flexible with that. Like, what works today might not work tomorrow. I needed genuine, true flexibility. I needed people around me who I could trust. What I learned as well is that unfortunately not everyone will be in that position, and I think that is really difficult for people. I would say it's about finding people who understand and who can trust, and those people may surprise you. They might not be the people who you thought that they were, but I found that was really essential to my healing and my recovery. And I also think a key takeaway was that in that position, in that space that I was in and the level of severity of pain that I was in, what I needed from my employer was completely different from what I need now. So now when I'm talking about kind of well-being and, going for walks at lunchtime and doing a bit of yoga, if someone had said to me at the time, maybe you just need to go out for a lunch at walk, oh my goodness, that would have been incredibly unhelpful as a suggestion. So I think when we're looking at ourselves and the people around us who we support in whatever way that looks like in your roles in organizations, it's about recognizing that those responses will need to be dynamic, personalized and tailored, and that sometimes the most helpful thing for an individual can just be to be there and to be open and reach out and offer support and just let that conversation keep going. So it's everything everyone's already said, and I hope that for anyone out there that experience is helpful.
Charlotte, I mean, I was sat here nodding and listening to what you're saying, because what I was thinking about, and the thing that I think really stood out from what you're saying, was having individuals around you who you can actually share your hardest times with, and someone who can actually level with what you're going through. Because as you rightly said, sometimes the individual who you believe would not be able to help is the person that can help the most. And for me, again, going back to my personal circumstance, I had a few individuals around me who I just was able to talk to openly and freely. share anything that I had on my mind, and they were able to come back to me with just maybe even putting their arm around my shoulder and saying, don't worry, everything's going to be okay, because sometimes that is really important. And for me, I think we really underestimate that the people that can help the most and the people that can prevent you going through hardship are the people who are literally around you in your circle. And I think what you said was absolutely spot on. And I think it's vital to recognize that. And I guess that brings me nicely to my next question for both yourself, Georgia, and Sue. I mean, have you both experienced any positive changes in your well-being as a result of interacting with colleagues who prioritize supporting employee well-being? And could you potentially share an example of where and if that's happened?
Yeah, sure. For me, yeah, that has happened. I think it's really an important part, as you and Charlotte have both mentioned, of any team, is to have that open and honest communication. And also there's a lot of studies around empathy that I'm interested in, because one of the topics I talk about a lot with the workplaces is resilience. And one of the key things, the 8 kind of documented components of resilience is having empathy and social connection with other people in your team or your family or whatever unit you're looking at. And if you have empathy with other people, you're more likely for them to be empathetic towards you. So it's really good for social cohesiveness, and we're obviously very much social creatures. So it's really important that we listen actively to our colleagues' concerns, and also enable that from others when we want to be open and honest about how we're feeling. And for me, when I was experiencing a bit of workplace or workload anxiety in a previous role, for me, it was about opening up to a girl that had only recently started, that I'd spend a lot of time inducting and showing. And so I knew that I had her trust because I'd been kind of inducting her into the organisation. And then we were, similar age, similar background and everything. And it felt a really easy person to talk to. So I said to her, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed at the moment with the amount of work. And she was just like, well, I'm not surprised, you do so much, and, something's got to give. And then we kindly, we were allocated to the same projects anyway, but she kindly kind of took some of my workload and we worked on it together, and then just said to our line manager, look, this is what we've done. And he was like, that's great, because there is a lot to be done. So it was a very simple solution to something that, prior to articulating, I felt was a very big problem. And sometimes, a problem shared really is a problem halved. And once you actually get it out to the open, it becomes much smaller and insignificant, really. So, yeah, that has happened to me.
Thank you, Sue. I really appreciate that. And again, that phrase, a burden shared, a burden halved, is so important, because it really is, isn't it? And from what you're saying, you truly felt a lot better after that. So that's great. Thank you very much. And coming to yourself, Georgia, as well, if you could share anything from your perspective.
Yeah, I think, this is all around conversation. I really appreciate everything that you shared around empathy, Sue. And I think all of this, sometimes it's quite easy to sort of talk about it, and it's not always easy to action it. And I think there's been, I suppose this isn't my own experience, but just experience of working with clients, I think there's a lot of pressure right now that is put on line managers. And, not everyone is made to be a people leader, and that's okay. But I think often people are put into people lead roles without being given the correct support to do so. And, I mention again hybrid working just because I think it manifests in so many different ways, and it's harder to have these conversations through a screen. But I think it's really important to equip line managers, leaders, people leaders with the tools to have these ongoing conversations, to lead vulnerably, to be able to recognize their own emotions and, recognize how they're showing up to situations and conversations, but also recognize how their actions or their comments might be affecting others. as well. And I think, you know, if we think about like the mental health continuum, we want to be making sure, as we've all said, that we're having these conversations all the way along that continuum. And, you know, we don't want to be getting to the point where people are at the brink of burnout, or they really are in crisis mode, and, you know, they're at the point of being signed off for whatever reason that might be. And of course, we know that our mental health and our well-being is affected by a multitude of different factors. A lot can be, you know, experiences outside of the workplace, but we also know that our mental health and our well-being can be either, you know, can be affected by things happening inside of work. And I think, you know, everything that we've been talking about, just being able to create that space for, you know, psychological safety, to be open and honest, to have these conversations. And I think when we talk about psychological safety as well, like it's not just a responsibility of HR. It's not just a responsibility of senior leadership teams. It's all of our responsibility. And, you know, creating that space where you can, just as Sue said, you know, be that listening ear to a colleague if they need, and just recognizing those moments where you can offer that support, and just continue to normalize these conversations around well-being. And I think I still find myself in situations or in organizations where there is this, unfortunately, this taboo around mental health. And I think the more that it can be spoken about openly and we can share our own experiences, the more we can continue to break down those barriers that are still there. And I just want to say as well, like, I really appreciate everyone here, like, sharing their own personal experience, because I think it does go such a long way. So yeah.
Thank you, Georgia. No, that's really kind of you. And same from my side. I think, you know, with the four of us that are speaking on this webinar today, we've shared our own personal experiences, and that's absolutely a start where, you know, we're sharing our own experiences. We're talking about our own, you know, experiences and what we've done and how we've dealt with it. And I think people can learn from that. And hopefully the people that are listening into this webinar will take something away from each and every one of our stories and say, you know what, I could take this from Georgia as an example, this from Charlotte, this from Sue. So that's exactly what we're looking to do. And I really do believe we've had some good sort of conversation that hopefully will get people thinking a bit more about how they can manage their well-being.